Hello, everyone. Welcome to our lunchtime talk today. Our talk is titled, Living in a Polarized World, Can We Navigate Conflict Without Canceling Those Who Challenge Us? With everything going on in our world today, this topic couldn't be any more relevant, no pun intended. There are a number of other talks scheduled for this week too, so please check out our Facebook page or Instagram for more information. A bit about me. My name is James Wall, and I'm a third-year student at McGill pursuing a Bachelor of Science with a major in physiology. I'll be your MC this afternoon, and I'm really excited to hear from our speaker today. Now, before we get going, I would like to take some time for a land acknowledgement. As organizers of this event, and as Christians, we believe that God created all land on this earth and the peoples that inhabit them. We wish to acknowledge that the University of Toronto is situated on the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and Mississaugas of the Credit River. A few hundred miles away, McGill University is situated on land that has long been the meeting place of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. Today, these lands are still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to be able to work and learn here alongside them. Now, two bits of housekeeping business that we have. First, please let us know if you have any accessibility needs, and we'll do our best to accommodate you. You can email relevant2021@gmail.com. That's relevant2021@gmail.com. And second, when we get to the Q&A period, I encourage you not to hold back your challenging or uncomfortable questions. However, please do remember to be respectful, and we'd ask that you refrain from using inappropriate language. Now, a short feedback form is going to be sent out in the chat. We would love to get to know you all a little better and find ways to improve these events. Please take the time to fill it out towards the end of the talk, and I'll remind you of this again later. Now, to usher us into our conversations for today, we are first going to share a quick video from Laurie Chan, hearing her story about navigating conflict with others.
Hi, my name's Laurie. I'm a first-year student at McGill studying environmental science and international development. So as well as I was brainstorming what I want to share, I was inspired by the topic because I was reminded about family and its importance, especially in a time when I can't physically see many of them. Growing up, my family would frequently drive up to spend time with my grandparents. I generally get along with them really well and love them a lot. However, there's one instance that stands out in my mind that I was reminded of when thinking about conflict. One day, as we were sitting in my grandparents' apartment, we got on the topic of mental health. I was explaining about a mental health initiative that I'd gotten involved with at my school, and my grandmother made a comment along the lines of it being unnecessary or that people didn't really need it, and that there's just much worse things that we don't understand yet about the world. And, maybe that was true, but at the time it felt like a personal attack on me, and I automatically got defensive. In these moments, while I might think of myself as open-minded, I recognize that I still have a lot to do in terms of accepting contrary opinions. So I'm very much like my grandmother. We can be very stubborn, think we're right, recipe that can lead to canceling each other's opinions if they differ. Of course, my grandma had her own life experiences and grew up in a world that was vastly different than mine, and that brought another layer to our polarized views on the subject. At the time, I remember feeling angry, misunderstood. I felt like my feelings and personal struggles were not recognized and even trivialized by my grandma, someone that I loved and respected. It was even more intense because I felt like I was opening up about something that was important to me, so obviously I had strong opinions on it. And of course, she had her own opinions on the subject, guided by her life experience. And I remember the time feeling kind of guilty for talking back, but I also felt like I had to make my point heard. And so it was a really big instance of letting my pride take control. And so when I look back at that, I realized that a lot of my conflict came from my personal pride, something that I still very much struggle with. I'm now constantly reminded, though, of, what does it mean really to turn the other cheek, like Jesus said, and do it in a gracious way that is still effective and also doesn't let you just get, stepped over, because that's also not a really great way of dealing with conflict, and do it in a way that does love others completely and wholly for who they are, and knowing that we are all imperfect and sinful as humans. And, sometimes that seems dire, but I've been realizing that it's actually very hopeful, knowing that we're all broken, but despite falling again and again, and we're still loved and we're forgiven by God. And that does give me a lot of sense of, comfort. So I recognize also when I was thinking about this instance that I always held this subconscious view that somehow all my, extended family members were just closed-minded, traditional, and so I never really took the time to have these conversations. So when topics did come up, I recognized that I get very defensive and automatically, get prepared to argue, thinking that, they're just stuck in the past and I know everything. And of course, that makes it for a lack of me truly listening and just automatically canceling their opinions before I even hear them. And I've come to realize that often these conversations with people that we hold close are often the hardest, and it feels like a constant dilemma of being honest while also fitting into an expectation of what I think I should be. So when I was thinking about this, the gospel really has served as a key part of my own reconciliation with how I approach conflict, especially with family members, but also, other people. It's a recurring theme throughout the Bible, verses like love your neighbor as yourself, or be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. Or another really good one, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And of course, Jesus stands as a perfect example as someone who dealt with people doubting him, holding conflicting opinions to him, and also just him coming into a very polarized world. But he did everything very thoughtfully, out of love, no matter who it was that he was interacting with, whether that was a political leader or a neglected person in society. And it reminds me that other people are really gifts from God, and each person with their opinions is uniquely and beautifully made, and ultimately we're all here to help each other out and grow through conflicting opinions, knowing that we have the love of God. And that really keeps me going and gives me an immense amount of encouragement as I continue to navigate through conflicts.
Thank you so much for sharing, Lori. What a great way to hear from other students before we start with our conversations today. Now, to deliver our keynote address this afternoon, we are thrilled to have Dr. Jon Waind. Jon is an assistant professor in the Department of Theological Studies at Concordia University and holds a PhD in religious studies from McGill. He researches and teaches on the intersection of religious ethics and public life. And his main research and teaching interests are in philosophical and theological approaches to human vulnerability and social issues proceeding from that basic condition. And prior to pursuing an academic career, Jon served as a youth pastor for 10 years in the Lower Mainland of BC. We are so excited to have you here, Jon, but before I pass it on to you, here's just a little breakdown of how the rest of our time will go. So first, Jon will be sharing his expertise on this topic in his talk, and then following this, we'll have a time for Q&A. Now, I encourage all of you in the audience to write down any of your questions that come up during the talk, and you'll be able to ask them through Slido using the code RELEVANT. I'll also explain this more in detail afterwards. Now, without further ado, over to you, Jon.
Thank you very much, James, for that very generous introduction. And thank you to the Relevant team for the invitation to take part in this great event. I was able to catch a couple of the talks yesterday, Richard's talk and Tim's in the evening, and I was encouraged both by what they had to share, but also by the really fascinating and challenging questions that were posed. So it gives me a little bit of nervousness looking ahead to our Q&A time. And I really appreciate Lori's story as well, that led us off here, as I think she has highlighted a few really important elements of the issue of navigating conflict and even some of the places where that conflict might surprisingly come up for us. Now, there's little doubt, I think, today that we live in a polarized world. If nothing else, the drama that we watch on a daily basis south of the border can lead us to that conclusion. But what does this mean? Do we think about what it means? And do we recognize polarized views that don't just exist in the drama of the evening news, but also exist in the different elements of our daily life? And I think one of the things we see as we look at the news, as we listen to conversations, is we often see, or at least the caricature is that, of people screaming past each other. people from the extreme of whatever side of the issue is being discussed, not listening, but wanting to be heard, and just yelling, screaming, and sometimes to the point of violence, bringing their points across. The other option, right, if one option of living in a polarized world is people screaming past each other, I think another option is, another way that we see this play out is muted silence, where we retreat to the comfort of those who share our views, or we exist in our culture, in our neighborhood, in our classes, in muted silence, cowed into silence against the cultural tide. We realize we maybe don't fit, our perspectives don't fit, that they maybe aren't welcome, that maybe we would face some form of pushback or even embarrassment if we were to really express our convictions, our perspective on certain items. And so we sit in silence. And too infrequently, we find a full-throated and informed discussion or debate on moral issues. For me, this became evident in my teaching as a grad student, and after I'd finished my PhD at McGill. It was teaching courses like religion and human rights and sexual ethics, and courses that brought you into topics that are difficult to discuss. And in my sexual ethics class, one of the topics that I put on the syllabus was the topic of abortion. And it was interesting to me to bring that into an ethics class, and to really have the main point of the lectures be, we can talk about this. That really was the main point of the lecture. Why? Well, in Canada, we have a prime minister who, when he took control of the Liberal Party, he said, listen, every member of this party needs to be pro-choice. And there's really no debate on this. And of course, there's some high profile Christians in the Liberal Party, John McKay being one, and there was some drama around his comments in return to that. My idea here isn't to pick on one political party. What do we see on the opposite side of the aisle? The Conservative Party under Stephen Harper or under Andrew Scheer would consistently say, we don't talk about this issue. We're not going to bring this issue up for debate. Now, we can see that there's maybe a lot at risk in politics. And maybe we could say, oh, I can understand why they wouldn't bring that topic up, right? But the problem is it entrenches us in a culture where we don't talk about tough issues. My children, I'm now the father, I have no children that aren't at least teenagers. I even have a 20-year-old at this point. And when my oldest daughter, Cassia, was in high school, she took a debating class. And I went to one of those, parents, meet the teacher nights, and you walk through the class schedule. And I was really interested to go to the debating class and hear what they were going to talk about. However, at the end of the 10-minute session, I was, disappointed to see that they weren't going to really talk about anything difficult. And so afterwards, I went to the teacher and I said, so what do you do with tough topics? Like marriage is a tough topic today, abortion, obviously a difficult topic, end of life issues. How do you deal with those in a debate class in a high school? Her answer, we don't cover those. We don't talk about those. Again, I can maybe understand it's difficult. You've got students coming from all sorts of different backgrounds. How do you navigate these issues? But the problem is nobody learns how to navigate those issues. And then we return back to the setting that I think is the main setting for most of us, the university setting, the university classroom. And if you do a search on YouTube, it's a little more difficult to find than it used to be, but you can find a video from 2009 where a pro-life group on McGill had invited a speaker to come in and give a talk on abortion. And in the video, he gets, introduces who he is and his topic, and very quickly he is shouted down by students in the audience, who then proceed, and there's multiple parts to the video, so you need a playlist to view it all. But they proceed to sing children's songs to keep him from sharing his perspective. So even on the university campus, this place for the exchange of ideas, we're saying, here's something we cannot talk about, we will not talk And it's not just the issue of abortion. It's difficult issues that we often decide this topic is closed. We're either going to scream past each other, which is one reason why the topic gets closed, or we let those who hold minority positions sit in silence. And I think we need to do better than that. Now, I thought maybe we'd start with a couple of poll questions just to see where people stand on these issues. And so the first question I would ask, and I'd ask you to on the poll to just agree, disagree, or you can say you're uncertain, you're unsure. So if we can put the polls up. The first question is, it's a statement: I feel safe expressing my moral convictions in public, or I feel safe expressing those convictions in a classroom setting. So take a moment, agree, disagree. Okay, very interesting. Maybe not definitive, maybe even the statement isn't well expressed, but many are saying they do feel safe expressing moral convictions in public. A good number saying they do not feel safe. So the interesting thing for me is, as a university instructor in courses on ethics, what bears out is that those who feel safe sharing their moral convictions are usually those who have share the majority position, or who have somewhat progressive views on morality. Let's look at the second question. And here again, agree or disagree. Some moral issues should not be discussed or debated. Some moral issues simply are beyond discussion. So here we seem to have a little more overwhelming agreement on the disagree aspect of this. So if we're all reading the poll the same way, or if I'm understanding the way the poll, you're interpreting the poll, we're saying, listen, moral issues should be discussed. The problem with that is that we don't either discuss them or we don't discuss them well. And the aim of today's talk is to move towards discussing these things well. It's important. Yesterday was Martin Luther King Day in the United States, and King has a very famous quote. He says, "A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law." And I think sometimes people forget, or at least they don't emphasize, that Martin Luther King Jr., as a civil rights activist, was his activism was informed and inspired by Jesus Christ. And so he's looking at, he has another very famous statement that our present isness is out of sync with our eternal oughtness. A gloss on the Lord's Prayer: Our Father in heaven, holy is your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And we have this problem with the fact that in this sinful world, our actions, our ideas of justice are often out of sync with God's will. And that's what he noted in light of racial segregation and laws that targeted Black people. And he says one has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws, right? As long as a law is just, you have a moral and a legal responsibility to obey it. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. And he invokes Augustine to say an unjust law is no law at all. Now, this gets us to the point where we need to discuss difficult moral issues. How can we ensure whether laws are just, or how can we oppose unjust ones if we have no open discourse about what is and what is not just? And that's what I hope to walk us through here in the remainder of our time. Are some principles related to this. Now, over all of what I'm going to say is the love of God and the love of neighbor. And we see just ahead of the parable of the Good Samaritan, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read here? The lawyer responded, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you've given the right answer. Do this and you will live. And everything I want to say here is conditioned by the great commands to love God and to love our neighbor. And our neighbor love is to be informed by that love of God. Everything's conditioned by that. And I would argue nothing is incongruous with it. Now, you may want to question that. So that would be something we may want to test in the Q&A session together. But there's 4 basic points that I want to make this afternoon. And the first is that we should expect difference. In Lori's story, one of the things she highlighted was the issue of difference with her grandmother. And we might say, well, I kind of expect to have differing opinions with my grandmother or with someone who is older, who's a different generation. But often we don't expect it, or we may not expect such harsh difference. It's one thing to expect difference of opinion, especially moral opinion, with someone who is not a Christian, or with someone who is not close to you, not a part of your family, not a loved one or a close friend. But what do we do with difference when we find it in places that surprise us? One of my most difficult classroom experiences was in teaching Christian ethics to Christian students at a Christian institution. And one of the reasons it was difficult is because I knew people would have different opinions, but I didn't expect how vehemently opposed students had become to what have been traditional notions of Christian ethics. And out of a concern for social justice, there was a sense of again, not really needing to discuss certain issues, but simply by relying on the claim that everybody just needs to love each other, we need to rely on compassion, we kind of set these aside. And it was difficult, far more difficult than standing in front of 200 students in a sexual ethics class at McGill, where I expected difference and where I was ready for some of the conversations that would ensue. And my encouragement here is that we should expect difference. N.T. Wright, in his book, Evil and the Justice of God, he talks about the new problem of evil. And here's how he articulates it. He says, we ignore evil until it smacks us in the face. We're surprised when it does. And then we react in immature and dangerous ways. And I think that's applicable to the way that we approach some moral issues. These are discussions of evil. That might seem like an extreme way to talk about it, but injustice is evil. And we're surprised when injustice smacks us in the face. Sometimes we're surprised because we never thought something was unjust. And we have to work through and sort through what it means for it to be just or unjust. We're surprised by differences of opinion, but we shouldn't be. We live in a culture where it can be very difficult to talk about these issues. And we shouldn't be surprised that other people hold different opinions from us. And we shouldn't be surprised when we face these issues within the community of the church. We are constantly surprised, it seems, by leading celebrity Christians who fail drastically morally. We seem constantly surprised by that. We shouldn't be at this point. We can be disappointed, but we probably shouldn't be surprised. Nor should we be surprised when there becomes a shallow distinction between Christian ethics and the broader ethics of the society and the culture in which we are, right? Expect difference. That is going to help us to be prepared for discussion. The second thing I would say is own your convictions. What do I mean by this? I think it could be misinterpreted easily. What I don't mean is be true to yourself. Christianity is, we believe that sin leads not just to brokenness, but actually the cause of sin, the reason we are responsible for sin is rebellion, that we are rebels. And so being true to ourselves is really a way of saying, well, I am going to decide. It's going to be my will. And our wills are very frequently poorly aligned. John Calvin talks about the heart being an idol factory, so that our love, rather than being directed at and oriented towards God, it's oriented towards self and everything that goes with that. So what do I mean by owning your convictions? It's bringing together both the idea of following Christ, but also the idea of belonging to his church and to his body. Many people find a discussion of religion, or they find religion to be a problematic term. I actually don't think you can understand what it means to follow Christ without understanding that that is a religious commitment. It is something that shapes your life. Sometimes I've heard Christians say, well, we don't really need doctrine, we just need love. But that's completely incongruous with the teachings of the New Testament. We see Paul in 1 Timothy 4, verse 16. He says, pay close attention to yourself and to your teaching. Continue in these things, for in doing so, you will save both yourself and your hearers. Paul's saying, pay close attention to doctrine and to your life. Weigh them against each other. He says this a bit more explicitly, and in fact, the entire letter to the Ephesians is structured so that you are thinking about doctrine in the first half of the letter and ethics in the second half. And the turning point is Ephesians 4, verse 1, where Paul says, I therefore, the prisoner in the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling you've received. And there's worthy, this Greek word axios, which is this balance. And if you're to lead a life worthy of the calling you received, what we see in Ephesians is that the whole first half of that text is the calling God has placed, the things God has done. And the second half is our response to it. And when Paul is saying lead a life worthy of the gospel, he's saying lead a life worthy of the calling you've received. We need to know our convictions. So how do you, and sorry, what I'm saying, I'm being very specific about saying own your convictions. It's not just about knowing them. It is about owning them. It is about belonging to a confessional community, the church. It is about the rituals of baptism and of Eucharist or communion, or the Lord's Supper, however your church refers to it. These rituals that are a part of as James Smith calls, storying us. They're a part of us not fitting God into our story, but finding our place in his story. That is, I would say, argue how we should read scripture, find our place in God's story. Recite the creeds, these summaries of the Christian faith. Pray the Psalms. If you daily pray the Psalms, here's one thing that's going to happen for you, is you are going to realize that over and over again, the thing you are acknowledging is that God is your salvation. He is your hope. He is your strong tower. He is your ever-present help in times of trouble. And in navigating this polarized world, you might say, well, John, hold on. Aren't you just kind of doubling down? You're acknowledging the world is polarized, and you're saying, hey, polarize even further. Well, sure. What I'm saying is own your convictions, live your convictions. You need to know your convictions. James Davison Hunter, in his book, The Death of Character, he says, character is formed in relation to convictions and is manifested in the capacity to abide by those convictions, especially in the face of temptation. This being so, the demise of character begins with the destruction of creeds, the convictions, and the God terms that made those creeds sacred to us and inviolable within us. He's saying we lose character when we lose creed, when we lose conviction, when we don't not only don't own our convictions, but we don't even know what they are. And my challenge here is know your convictions. And when someone says, oh, look, love is enough, the response is, look, I don't even know what love is if I don't know who God is and what he has done. Love is not a vacuous term. When John writes, we love because he first loved us, he's not saying, hey, it's an exchange. God loves you, you love him back. He's saying we love because of the first lover, because God is love. And however close we come to actually loving is based on our imitation of him, and it is based on his spirit living in and through us. Third, make just judgments. Now, you may say, whoa, judgments. This does not sound like Christianity. In fact, let me just, Matthew 7, let me just quote Jesus for you. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. So, say, well, hey, we're not supposed to judge. We shouldn't judge anyone. My challenge to you would be, go ahead, try that. Try to actually get out of bed in the morning and not make any judgments. Don't make any determinations about what you will wear, what you will eat. These are rather mundane issues, but we all make those judgments. We make judgments about who we will take on as friends in our lives. We make judgments about how those people we don't get to choose, like our family members, how things are going with them. You can't escape making judgments. And actually, the gospel doesn't tell you to escape making judgments. The command to not judge is a command against judgmentalism. But Jesus also says, judge for yourselves. Luke 12:57, why don't you judge for yourselves what is right? Paul in 1 Corinthians, when talking about an issue of sexual morality, he says, look, don't judge outside the world. But when you find something like this within the church, you make judgments. Okay. Now, my point here isn't to build up a judgmental army to go around. And to be honest, coming through December, I'm worn down from judgment, right? From grading a couple hundred students and their work. It's not fun, that part of it. But we are called to make judgments, to make just judgments. And I would argue that owning your convictions is central and necessary to making just judgments. Jean Beth Gaelstein, she says, it's compassion with judgment, not instead of it. So to a culture that says we don't need judgment, we just need love, she's arguing we can't exist without judgment, but it's judgment with compassion. It's judgment conditioned by love, and judgment conditioned by the love of God, not just whatever way I am thinking about love. Judging, she says, is a mark of our respect for the dignity of others and of ourselves. And the fourth point that I want to make is this, that we need to learn toleration. And toleration is likewise a term that has fallen out of favor in some ways. John Locke, some of you in political science may have been reading some of his work, and maybe you've read a letter concerning toleration. The toleration of those that differ from others in matters of religion is so agreeable to the gospel of Jesus Christ and to the genuine reason of mankind that it seems monstrous for men to be so blind as to perceive the necessity and advantage of it in so clear a light. Now, he doesn't mean toleration as accepting other perspectives or celebrating other perspectives. Toleration is not needed if you accept what someone else says, or if you tolerate it, or if you agree with it. Fundamental to toleration is putting up with things that you disagree or dislike. I have to tolerate Brussels sprouts every Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I don't tolerate it easily, but my wife loves them, so I tolerate it. Right? Toleration is a part of life in that sense. Some would argue that it's a problem. I would argue I don't think we can have a well-ordered society, and I don't think we can live well without toleration. And Reinhold Niebuhr offers us a test of toleration, and I think this is really helpful when we think of our polarized world. So he says, and it's a twofold test. One is toleration means the willingness to entertain views which oppose our own without rancor and with the effort to suppress them. Can we listen to, think about, entertain views that we disagree with, that we don't like, that we think are a problem? Okay, that's one test of toleration. The second is this, the ability to remain true and to act upon our best convictions. For Niebuhr, he's saying, listen, you need to hold these together. You need to balance these to be able to entertain views that you oppose while holding to your own best convictions. And perhaps one of the most poignant ways he puts toleration is this: our tolerations of truths opposed to those which we confess is an expression of the spirit of forgiveness in the realm of culture. An expression of the spirit of forgiveness in the realm of culture. And I think that is a vital aspect to navigating conflict. Expect difference, own your convictions, make just judgments, learn toleration. And I think, as Laurie pointed us towards, right, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Above all, clothe yourselves with love. And if I can make one last comment, and I think in a theme of social justice and after Martin Luther King Day, I think it's quite relevant. When King was talking about the injustices he faced, and not just words, but fists and bats, he said the problem is not a purely racial one. In the end, it is not a struggle between people at all, but a tension between justice and injustice. Nonviolent resistance, his tactic for addressing injustice, is not aimed against oppressors, but against oppression. And if we are going to foster justice and to fight injustice, we need to recognize, as the Apostle Paul says, and as we see Martin Luther King Jr. noting, our battle is against injustice. And a full-throated dialogue and being committed to that is an important element of battling injustice. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing those incredible insights, Jon. I'm glad we've had a chance to dive deeper into this topic today, and I'm hopeful everyone here has some good takeaways. So now is our time for our Q&A. It looks like we have quite a few questions already, so thank you for those. But in case you haven't used Slido before, I'll quickly walk you through it. So you can all go to slido.com if you're not there already. That's slido.com, and you can use the code RELEVANT. And so once you're in, you can type in your questions, and we'll do our best to get those answered. And also, if you like someone else's question and want to hear more on that, hit the thumbs up to bring it closer to the front of the queue. So with that, we will start with our first question. So our first question for you, Jon, is how do we respond to the argument, quote, acceptance but not approval, end quote, is not actually love?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not just for sorting things out, but it's extremely practical, because that is one of the issues that you face when confronting difficult topics and topics about human freedom, right? What people should or should not be free to do. And I would have to go back to what I was saying about owning your convictions. As a Christian, my idea of love isn't just my own. I don't just get to make it up. And I think we've very foolishly, as Christians, we've been submersed in a culture that has really taken ownership over the meaning and definition of love. And the Bible is very clear about love. God is the source of love. And in fact, one of the most important witnesses of Christians is their love for one another. If you want to read about love from a Christian perspective, I probably can't recommend anything more highly than just living in 1 John, other than maybe reading John, the Gospel of John as well. But 1 John, the 4th chapter, God is the author of love. This is a scriptural foundation. This needs to be our commitment, so that when we have conversations about love, a part of that needs to be exploring what is the meaning of love. I feel like the definition of that term is assumed, and as Christians, many times we just go with the assumption rather than recognizing God is the author of love. And that means not only, I don't say that to you as ammunition for your arguments. I say it as a challenge. God is the author of love. We need to know God, and we need to let him shape our lives so that our responses are loving, and so that we actually know what we're talking about when we start to talk about love.
That's great. All right, our next question is about more about current event. So it says, in light of the sexual misconduct of Mr. Ravi Zacharias, should his apologetics ministry, so RZIM, be restricted from participating in university or college campus activities?
What's question 3? No, I'm just kidding. It's tough, and it hits home very closely in the sense that maybe the previous scandal was the Jon Waind scandal, and I had the misfortune last year of publishing a brief article in a small journal. So I guess it's the fortune that was a small journal that used some of Vanier's discussions about love and loneliness and things as a part of the argument towards the end, only to just before publishing have the news of his sexual misconduct come out. I think, and I haven't read a lot about what what the Ravi Zacharias ministries are doing. So for me, I think there's 2 things that leap out. One is, and I think to some degree the ministry is doing this, they obviously should take a step back and willingly take a step back and think about what this means for the ministry. I hope it's not just a rebranding, right, but that it's a thoughtful, reflective response. I think the other part of it, and this is where maybe evangelicals, Christians need to think more clearly about the church, is perhaps, especially present among evangelicals, we follow the culture too much by, being corporate bodies and organizations that are outside of, in many ways, the church. And being inside the church doesn't guarantee obviously perfection. We've got some massive child sexual abuse scandals that can attest to that. But I think it's an acknowledgement of, and an organizational acknowledgement of being a part of the body of Christ, being under the authority of Christ and the authority of the body of Christ more directly, and just even thinking about what the work of apologetics is. But there's a lot you could talk about there. I would agree with the idea that they should pull back and through a full investigation of what this means. Does it mean that everything they've done is colored this way? Well, there's again, unfortunately, Ravi Zacharias is not the only person, and again, one of the problems we have in a polarized world is everybody else is evil and we're good. And one of the things we need to remember is that the line between good and evil doesn't just run between us and them, it runs down the middle of us. And as we think about somebody like Ravi Zacharias, as we are making just judgments, one of the just judgments we make is that being a Christian means struggling against sin, not in this life being perfect. So I don't know if those thoughts are helpful. I probably defer a bit to the processes that they are taking at the moment, and I don't think his misconduct means that there's nothing in that ministry that was good, or there's no good people in that ministry, but it certainly is something, a reason to step back and assess and consider some serious ramifications.
Thank you. Yeah. Our next question is on a different note. So it says, how do we walk the line between placing limits on someone with harmful views or actions and quote unquote canceling them?
Yeah, how do we walk the line between placing limits and canceling? That's a difficult question, and probably at least in the back of my mind is that Donald Trump doesn't get to tweet anymore, right? We think of that, coming right from the start. I think the problem is, one is a liberal dilemma, and that is the dilemma that John Stuart Mill argued, that not one voice should be silenced. that's a characteristic of liberty and of democracy, would be that it would be a problem to silence even one voice because you're silencing the rest. Now, Mill also didn't have social media, probably wasn't thinking about the present issues they were facing. But I think that's a very serious issue that we need to think about, is what does it mean to silence one voice? And I think also a problem that the United States has right now is that it's very easy to say, here's an evil person and the rest of us are great, and to ignore deeper rooted problems that relate to the line of good and evil running down the middle of each of them, that there's a problem of sin and rebellion that everyone needs to face. Now, when someone's words incite violence and death, I think maybe the main problem is we've lost sight of virtues like prudence, and so there is a time, I think, to take actions to quell a voice. As Christians, really the method would be, and for all of those who are claiming Christianity and supporting someone whose religion was obviously themselves, there should have been those going in private and saying, hey, this is wrong, and then going in a small group to say, hey, this is wrong, and then as a body saying, whoa, there's a problem here, right, following Matthew 18. But that's not what we saw, because in a polarized world, you can't admit wrong, you can't admit problems. So the practical answer, I think there's a prudence to limiting someone's voice with all of the different platforms we have today, for sure. But I think that's just a Band-Aid. There are much bigger problems that need to be addressed. And a part of addressing that is being willing to have difficult conversations and being willing to talk to somebody about something that's you may have only things to lose in beginning those conversations. And I guess the prime example I think of is someone like Franklin Graham, who in the case of Trump should have had some different things to say than what we've heard him publicly say, not just recently, but throughout this American drama.
Thank you. Our next question is also along current event lines. So it says, should lines be drawn when a party brings out hateful ideas or misinformation? So they give an example like what they would deem political conspiracy theories or alternative quote unquote truths on science. Yeah.
Well, should lines be drawn? I think a part of the problem here is it goes back to, again, it's for me, it's a really fundamental point of owning one's convictions, and that too frequently Christians are politically motivated without realizing that our fundamental political statement is that Jesus is Lord. That is our fundamental political statement, and that is a political statement that forms us as a community, that forms us as citizens of heaven, and that is, in all of the political issues today, that is to me the fundamental issue, that Christians need to realize that the church is a political community, and their allegiance to Christ is a political allegiance. It's a recognition of his authority. I'm not saying that to say, oh, awesome, now this political party should really have all of these people behind it. It's to recognize your allegiance is not to earthly politics. Earthly politics are a part of the common good that we should speak to and that we should challenge. But our choices aren't simply between the left and the right, or finding something in the center. We are, and always are, as God's children, as those who proclaim the Lordship of Christ. We are God's people, and our love for God. And this is again an Augustinian reading, but you also see this in a contemporary theologian like Oliver O'Donovan. Our love of God is that political sign. So what do we do in those issues? We speak truth, and should speak truth, whether it is something that is helpful to a party that we might be more politically aligned to or not. We are committed to truth. And it may mean, many people face questions in voting, and well, how do I vote for this person, even though they represent my party? So I'm going to have to vote for this other person they don't represent. And I would suggest here that we probably need to take more seriously another option, which is abstaining, and not doing so in hiding, but saying, that this is a moral decision to abstain from this vote, and here is why. And I don't know, I think many people might disagree with that, but I think it's an area that we need to think about and discuss further. That, what does the Lordship of Christ mean to my participation in democratic politics? And too often we just are attracted to whatever party looks most like us, and we're driven by our desire for domination. And instead of inquiring about the truthfulness of what's happening, and the rightness of what a party or what a person is doing.
All right. Now we have a question about more about within the church itself. So it's, how do we combat cancel culture from within the church itself? And so I guess Christians, quote unquote, canceling other Christians.
Yeah. I guess we haven't necessarily defined what it means to cancel someone, but shutting down their voice or making a judgment about their salvation, those seem like religious ways of canceling. And I've said we need to make judgments. I think one of the important things about judgment, and actually Oliver O'Donovan again talks about this in his book, The Ways of Judgment, is that we need to be discerning in this life, but I don't get to close the book on anyone. I'm not the determiner of one's whether one is saved or not saved. And I think we need to be able to make judgments, to be discerning people, while recognizing in humility the limits of our judgments, and even the ways our judgments are not just limited, but can be biased. But how should we handle differences within the church? I think again we need to recognize, church discipline is something that we, generally, especially Protestants, and I'm a Protestant, it's not really a part of church life, except for in the most extreme of cases. But what is the purpose of church discipline? So what would be the purpose of excommunicating someone? It's not getting rid of them. It is that we're going to this extreme so you will see the sin or the wrongness of your ways, and that you will be coming back into community, restored into community. But we don't, and this is a failure, we don't have difficult conversations in the church. We don't, in many ways, know our deep convictions. And just even about love, we often assume a very worldly notion of love as some kind of compassion, without letting love be fully formed by God. But I think within the church too, the other element of this is that truth can handle investigation. So we need to be willing to sort through the bottom of some of these issues. Now, it's hard to know what somebody's meaning by canceling someone, but the sin should be dealt with, and I guess I think especially of an issue like misconduct, and especially misconduct against those who are vulnerable, against children. The New Testament itself is very clear that this should not just be taken seriously, but the words of Christ are, it'd be better to have a millstone around your neck and thrown into the ocean than to than to lead any of these little ones astray. And so the New Testament takes very seriously dealing with these issues, but we need to know our convictions well and own our convictions well as a part of addressing moral issues or differences of belief within the church.
Great. Our next question is, so this person wants you to respond to, I guess, a line that people have used to cancel others. And so the line is this, so quote, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor," end quote. So they're just looking for your response on that.
Yeah. I think there is obviously a lot of truth in that. And as a white Canadian male, I'm from my own personal experience, I'm not the best person to speak to it. Just in the sense of I've lived in and I've grew up in the advantages of my skin color and my middle class life. And so it'd be easy for me to try to wander out of neutrality and say, to make some comment to escape that. But I think we are called to speak the truth in love. So the prior step is that we need to be willing to investigate things. When someone says there's an injustice that's done, part of the problem here is we are so desperate to protect reputations, and part of it we wonder, how does somebody like Ravi Zacharias go so long? How does somebody, other people who have had these major issues of misconduct yet led very public ministries? One of the reasons it continues is because of the desire of the institution to protect itself. And we have to be much more open and humble and ready to acknowledge our own wrongs, and not just the individual wrong I did, but that we exist in systems of rebellion. And so, the issue of neutrality, I would agree with that if we remain neutral about injustice, Martin Luther King Jr. is very clear about that. His letter from a Birmingham jail, he is challenging each and every person, including people who are enduring the injustice. He's challenging Black people and saying, as long as you sit silent, you're just contributing to injustice. But we need to, as a part of that, so recognizing the problem of remaining quote unquote neutral, which isn't neutral at all, we need to front and center be able to discuss what is and what is not just or what is an injustice. And I think we've failed on both those counts. One is we've relied on silence and neutrality to simply distance ourselves. It's not our problem. The other is that we just aren't having the conversations or the depth of conversations that we need to have.
Okay. This next question, we're turning back down south. And so they're asking, in light of the American election and the polarization that we seem to have, at least in that country, this person has seen a lot of friends online and they say, quote, "Unfriend me if you support X candidate," end quote. And so how would you respond to that?
Thank goodness friendship is a lot more than likes and dislikes on social media. I think go ahead and unfriend. The depth, I'm not totally sure how to respond to that. It seems like a very immature response. And I think I said it a couple of times, right? This idea that truth can handle investigation. If something is true, if you believe something is true, it seems odd that we can't talk about it, or that we can't test it, or that we can't discuss it any further. That's a really odd way to handle truth. And if you have friends who are saying, well, unless you believe like I do, then unfriend me. Well, I would question the depth of whatever friendship is there. And I would also question their openness to investigate that which they proclaim as true. That would seem to me.
Next question is also about friends. And so this person's asking, how do you show love to a friend with whom you fundamentally disagree? And so both in terms of what you believe and the actions that you enact on a daily basis.
That's hard because I don't have any friends. So no, I'm just kidding. Sort of little sad tear right now. No, but fundamental disagreement is something, I think there needs to be a part of friendship is a willingness to walk through different issues. But I think another part of it too is there may come issues where you don't get to have the choice of holding on to the friendship. Your friend may walk away from you because of those fundamental differences. But I think the onus on you, as far as you have agency, is to be a friend and to demonstrate that friendship, kindness, gentleness, that these things can be demonstrated despite difference. And I'm assuming this is difference of opinion, not difference of, hey, stop beating that person, right? Those would take obviously much more important and harsh condemnation. But I do believe that you can fundamentally disagree with someone, and maybe there's two different parts here, and remain friendly towards them or maintain the friendship, as long as you're willing to continue contributing to the friendship. One of my first experiences as a grad student at McGill, I had written my master's thesis on whether Christian arguments against same-sex marriage were just. I came to McGill. I spent a semester doing just my studies, and I was going to be a teaching assistant the next semester. I ended up being a teaching assistant for another grad student who was teaching religion and human rights, and she asked for some background on me, and I told her, I had gone to Trinity Western Seminary in British Columbia, and she was, oh, I'm from BC, so she knew the school. What did you write your thesis on? So I told her what I wrote my thesis on. She said, oh, that's interesting. I'm a married lesbian. And so that began our semester-long working relationship. And to her credit, she never walked away from friendly and cordial relations together. We sat down and had coffee and talked about our different perspectives on that moral issue. In an interesting development, I was at IKEA with my wife and 4 kids, and she was there with her spouse, and we sat down and had dinner together in the cafeteria at IKEA. So I think you can hold differences as long as you're willing to talk about them, and as long as you're willing to do so in a way that demonstrates love and openness to the other. But I think it definitely would put strains on a friendship and could make it more difficult. But it's navigating those things, and again, letting love be informed by God rather than by your own feelings or cultural definitions.
All right, thank you. We have a few minutes left, so hopefully we'll get through 1 or 2 more questions. So this next one is, how should we react when a famous person who claims to be a Christian acts in a manner opposing to what is Christ-like? And so this person's asking, should we judge them for that?
What do you mean by judge them? I think you can't escape making a judgment. So is your judgment, they're clearly no longer a Christian? Again, I would say, well, you can make judgments about the behavior, about the words. You can have serious questions. You just don't get to close the book on somebody's eternal destiny or their life. But the celebrity culture is a major problem in questions of moral issues. One, because and I remember, when I was a kid, waiting to get these magazines that had, they were Christian magazines, and they'd highlight a quarterback from the NFL, and I was so excited to have a hero that not only played a sport I liked, but also was a Christian. And the problem is we just put too much value in celebrity life that has zero to do with the gospel and what we're called to in the New Testament. So I think the problem is, and very interesting, I remember, we give voices, and one of the reasons we elevate celebrities is because we're like, well, they have a voice. They get to speak to culture. People listen to winners. All these ideas. The New Testament is really clear that it is the low position, that Jesus, rather than elevating his celebrity status or even seeking to equality with God, he took the place of the servant. And I think we just need a serious dose of humility and a much better understanding of what submitting to God and submitting to one another as Christians is going to mean.
All right. Perhaps we'll do one more and we'll do a lightning round on this question, although it is a little bit big, so do your best.
Okay.
What's wrong with cancel culture? And what is the difference between boycotting culture and cancel culture?
Well, what's wrong with cancel culture is, I think one of the issues with it is just the idea of canceling people or their opinions. And I think even in the roots of liberalism, the idea is you don't silence voices. You should hear voices. You should hear people. Now, that's not the same as boycotting something or stepping away. And there's many things that we should boycott or avoid because they are not going to build character or they are going to draw us astray. And I think the whole celebrity culture, the draw of that, the power, the prestige, the money, is a major problem for Christians today. And we probably need to see a lot of that much more similarly to the way that God was concerned for the Israelites and being drawn away by foreign gods. I think money, fame, fortune, influence, these are many of the foreign gods that draw us away today. So I think there's many things we should boycott, but if by canceling we mean these people don't exist, I don't think that helps us either.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, John. I'm impressed
Thanks,
with the 10 questions, so that's great.
And thanks for great questions, for sure.
Yeah, everyone in the audience, thank you for your questions. Thank you for engaging. We love having a dialogue about this. And so now, if you're interested in reading a little bit more on this topic, we have a few resources that John has recommended that you take a look at. So I'll just take a brief pause for a few seconds if you want to take a screenshot of this or something. And yeah. So I'm sure you can find these things online or at a bookstore or something like that. Okay, and so John, just before we head into some closing announcements, do you have any final remarks?
I think my maybe just to summarize a few things that I said. I think as Christians looking at difficult issues, we need to embrace that truth can handle investigation, and I think we need to dig deeply into the resources that we have, and more specifically into the imitation of the life of Christ and living by the strength of the Holy Spirit and living together as the body of Christ. I think we're going to face greater problems by not owning our convictions and letting God situate us in his story more firmly than perhaps we are letting him.
All right, thank you, John. For everyone else, before we let you go, we just had a few quick closing announcements. So first, I mentioned the feedback form before, and so we have one. And this feedback form is for you to tell us your thoughts about the event and or if you want to indicate whether you're interested in connecting with us more. And so the link is bit.ly/relevant2021feedback with no spaces. That's bit.ly relevant2021feedback. The link should be in the chat too. The form includes indicating just some basic information like what campus you're on, how you heard about the event, how you felt about it, or and any comments or questions that you have. And if you have any more questions or want to learn more about Christianity, or if you want to meet some Christian groups at either McGill or U of T, you can also indicate this in the form too. So next, I'd like to tell you about an upcoming program that we have called Alpha. It's also free. Alpha is an interactive series which engages people in conversations about the Christian faith. And so the sessions focus on big questions about life, faith, and meaning in this world. And so as a snapshot of each session, there's time to connect, watch one of the videos because it's a video series, and you can share and discuss any thoughts or questions about that you have about Christianity. So we'd love for you to join us online, and we'll be starting next week So that's the week of January 25th. And so please indicate your interest in the follow-up forum if you are interested, if you want to join this, or if you just want to receive more information. So we have a quick promotional video first. All right. Some of you may still have questions that you want to ask about this topic itself, the one we just talked about with Jon. So right after this webinar, we're going to be having a post-talk Zoom session until 2 p.m. And so it's going to be a little more informal and interactive. So you can discuss more on this topic, and we'll also go over some of the Slido questions that we weren't able to cover. And I believe Jon will be there, so you can hear more of his insights. So you can join if you just want to listen, and also there's a Zoom link on the slide. And so the link is bit.ly/relevant post talk, also no spaces between those. So for the rest of this week, as part of our relevant events, we have one more talk at lunchtime, and there's also talks in the evenings every day this week at 7 p.m. So we'll be covering quite an array of topics, and so we hope to see what another one that interests you. Also, from 12 to 1 p.m. this Wednesday and Friday, we'll be having Ask Me Anything Zoom sessions. And so if you have a pressing question about faith, or maybe you have many questions that you have at the back of your mind, come and ask George. He's the one that will be running these things. And so he's a staff member at Power to Change and Westminster Chapel. And so he'll try to answer your questions. You can also come if you just want to try and stump George. That's true. I'm sure he would welcome the challenge. Or if you just want to listen to other people's questions, yeah, you're invited too. So please join us. Bear with me. We're almost through this. So also from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Thursday, and from 5 to 6 p.m. every evening, we also have perspective Zoom sessions. And so in these perspective Zoom sessions, you can talk to volunteers and other attendees about 5 important topics. And so these topics are the nature of God, human nature, the meaning of life, the identity of Jesus, and the source of spiritual truth. So really deep things right there. So feel free to come by yourself, or invite a friend, or come together with a friend. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear your perspective and just engage in more dialogue. So one last reminder, again, please leave your feedback so that you can help us improve our events for the future. The form only takes 3 minutes, it's quite short, and so your feedback is invaluable to us. So also please note that when you exit the Zoom, the follow-up form will also pop up, and so it'll prompt you to fill it out. And so we'd really appreciate that. We'd also love for you to follow us on Instagram and Facebook, or you can visit our website at relevantseries.com. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'd also like to thank our AV and coordinating team for making this talk and this whole week possible. And that's all we have. So we hope to see you all again soon, and have a good day, everyone.